Testing. Hello, everybody. Welcome to EmpowerU. How's everybody doing tonight? Good. Just a couple things I wanted to go over with you about tonight's presentation. It's good to see you. And see if we can get that straightened around. We okay, Jay? So I'm Dan Reganold, and there we go. It's good to see you tonight. How many people came to our opening class the other night? About half of you. It was good. It was a great class. And what I wanted to do was to show you how to watch a class if you missed one. So Jay's got the website up here. And Jay, can you, let me get my pointer. So if you just go to our website, the classes are usually from the night before put on like the next day. So could you scroll up a little bit, Jay? Just a little bit. So the previous classes, so there's only one that we've only had one class, they go all the way to the bottom of the website. So if you go all the way to the bottom of the website after a class is on, you'll see something that says to view a complete recording of this class, click here. And Jay, go ahead and click that and just show them how it works. And it's that fast. You're just going to start. So it's great. So if you like the class and you want to tell somebody about it, it's as simple as that. One kind of trick we learned, if you've been on the website, and what it'll do when you bring the website up again, it'll keep a copy of the website from before. You have to hit your F5 key to refresh it, because the classes are posted the day after. And if it brings up an old copy you've been looking at, hit F5 to refresh it, and you'll be able to watch it. It's really easy. The sound is great too, and it looks good. So I wanted to tell you about a few classes we've got coming up. So on Saturday here, we've got Constitution Boot Camp number 47. And it's going to be a great class. And the reason I'm so excited about it is we have a lot of kids signed up. I think we've got 19 kids signed up. They're getting bribed to come. They're getting a $25 gift card to GameStop if they sit through all 5 hours. But we have to be creative, and we had a benefactor donate some money for that. And we thought, well, we'll try it. We'll see if it helps. So I'll give you a report on how many of the 19 make it 5 hours. And I think we've got 22 people on top of that that are going to come. So we've got a few spots left, maybe 2 or 3 or 4. So if you wanted to take the class, it's 5 hours. It's Saturday morning, starts at 9 o'clock. Jim Lewis teaches it. And it's a great class. And on Saturday, I think Jim will talk a little bit about his feelings about our speaker from the other night. He's opposed to the Convention of States for reasons that I'll let him talk about. And so that'll be interesting too. Next Tuesday night, okay, so when I was in high school, I remember it so well. The first book I ever read, kind of self-help, Think and Grow Rich. How many of you read it? It's a great book, and it was hard to read. I remember the print was small, and the guy is Napoleon Hill. He wrote it. It was hard to read. Have you ever had one of those books that was just really hard to get through? This was one, but it had a lot of good information. And Jay, I don't know if I need to change microphones or what. This one just says I'm having lots of feedback problems. I'll try another one, okay? Sorry. Testing. Hopefully that's a little bit better. But anyway, we've got 2 gentlemen who are coming in Tuesday night to present the Think and Grow Rich seminar. If you like that kind of stuff, self-help books, ways to improve, do things better, I encourage you to be here. I've heard somebody, well, our board member, Ken, right here, has seen it, and it's, what'd you say about it, Ken? How much? And how much is EmpowerU charging? Yeah. So I think it's going to be a fun class. I can't wait to kind of relive it. And then next Thursday night, we have a class on the Bricka murders. Our Cincinnati area criminologist, J.T. Townsend, will be here. and he'll be talking about probably the most notorious cold case in the history of Cincinnati. Have any of you seen him talk before about the Bricker murders? It's fascinating. If you've never seen it, you'll want to come and hear him. He's a great speaker also. And then on October 2nd, we're going to have a class on how to be an activist. We've got 4 great people who have done some great things in our community coming in to talk to us. Ed Bell, Jeff Capel, Kim Grant, and Matt Wallert will be here that night to tell you how to get involved in just whatever you want to get involved in your life to be empowered. So we've got a lot of great classes going on. I wanted to introduce you to our team. Bill Rolls, our treasurer back there. Let's give him a round of applause. We've got Jay, who's our producer. And we've got Ken, who's our board member right here. We're glad you're here, and we're glad that I think we've got 10 or 12 people logged on so far tonight on our virtual network. We're glad you're up there too. So I want to introduce Betty Overstreet, our Community Relations Director, who's going to do the giveaway and introduce our speaker. Let's give it a round of applause for Betty.
Thank you, Dan. We're giving away tonight one of Jim's books, Tobacco, Trusts, and Trump. So I'm going to have you, if you would please, draw a ticket. $414. Somebody's got 414. Oh, very good. You're going to like that book. I read it. I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I know I'm going to learn more just listening to him tonight. So anyway, Jim Rumford is an entrepreneur, amateur historian, and CEO of Rumford Industrial Group. Born in Louisville, Kentucky, Rumford grew up in Bracken County, Kentucky, and Cincinnati, Ohio, and now resides in Dayton, Ohio. His mission is to help people understand how events from history affect today, especially how the middle class is under attack. He wants to do anything he can to ensure a healthy middle class and promote entrepreneurship and capitalism for our children, grandchildren, and generations to come. During the Tobacco Wars, Rumford's own great-grandfather, George Washington Kenney, was attacked by night riders who burned down the family tobacco barns and destroyed the tobacco crop. His other great-grandfather, George Washington Jett, was one of the night riders who burnt down the tobacco barns. To help prevent history from ever repeating itself, Kenney compiled one of the largest private collections of Tobacco Wars primary documents in the United States. At 6 years old, Rumford discovered these documents and has been telling his great-grandfather's story ever since. Jim Rumford believes, as do most conservatives, that history isn't being taught. His expertise about a little-known event in American history called the Tobacco Wars brought about the abolishment of the trust, steel trust, oil trust, tobacco trust, etc. The origins of the Fed and the IRS is all explained over the course of this piece of history and intertwined with Rumford's own experiences and family history. He has those documents on a back table back here, so when you came in, if you didn't see them there, I know you don't have time to read them, but you're going to wish you did, but you check them out before you leave. Please give a warm welcome to Jim Rumford.
Thank you, Betty. Thank you. Welcome. Nice crowd. And you too up there. I grew up in several places, but the family came from Bracken County, Kentucky, which is about 50 miles upriver. Augusta, Brooksville, Maysville, many of you probably know it. Let me ask the question, has anybody ever raised a crop of tobacco or worked the tobacco patch? You have, okay. Then when I say you've never worked a day in your life unless you've raised a crop of tobacco, is that pretty much when you house the tobacco, were you on the bottom getting all the dirt or were you up in the top getting all the heat? Both? It was 130 degrees up there, pretty hot. Well, the scrapbook I have came from my great-grandfather. So he passed away, he gave it to his son, who was Tom Kenney. When my grandfather passed away, he gave it to his, my Aunt Joanne, when she broke up housekeeping. I called her up one day. I said, Joanne, they broke up housekeeping. What happened to all the antiques? And she said, well, a lot of those antiques came out of Fairfax County, Virginia, just after the American Revolutionary War, down the Ohio River on a flat bottom boat. And she said, well, Jimmy, the girls, Judy, Martha, and Hope got the antiques. I said, what about the guns? So, well, your cousin Joey, he got the guns. About 15 or 20 guns, rifles, pretty nice collection, private collection. So I said, where's the Knight Rider book? She said, Jimmy, you get the Knight Rider book. So that's how I got the book. So then they said, what are you going to do with it? So over the years, we always thought about doing a movie or doing a book or doing something since probably the past 40 years. So Stephanie found a ghostwriter. So he and I sat down every Monday morning for an hour or two, went to the scrapbook, laid out what we were going to do, and then proceeded that week to write that part of it. And then over 6 months, we came up with the book. So it's kind of interesting. Let me go back through the scrapbook a bit. But these times of the late 1800s and the early 1900s changed history quite a bit. Back in the 1800s, you had the trust going on. The first guy that had the trust was Carnegie. He had the steel mill trust. Now, Carnegie did a lot of good. He was an entrepreneur. Of course, you paid no income tax in those days. He made millions and millions of dollars, but he gave it away. He moved it in Cincinnati. The Cincinnati Library is founded on the Carnegie libraries that was gifted to the city of Cincinnati. So he went throughout the country giving those money away to libraries, to universities, colleges, that type of thing. So that was the good part of the trust. But the tobacco trust came in place. And the story goes like this. At the end of the Civil War, you had devastation of the South, as you know. But there's a fellow by the name of George Washington Duke. He was a Confederate naval soldier or officer. And he was captured and went to concentration camp. And when the war was over with, he made his way home. And when he got home, to his pleasant surprise, he wasn't sure if he was going to see his wife and kids or anything. So he gets home and he finds out that the family's fine. He had 5 tobacco barns full of tobacco. Most of the northern soldiers under Grant or under Sherman, they burned all this stuff down. So most guys went home to their farms, and of course things were burned down. So those tobacco farmers started raising tobacco. Well, George Washington Duke decided to manufacture tobacco products, chewing tobacco, smoking tobacco, cigar tobacco, anything to do with tobacco. He had 5 barns full, so he took his chicken coop and turned his chicken coop into a manufacturing plant. And then he started putting out products. This goes on for like 1866 through about 1890. So they started making some good money because as things rolled along, George Washington Duke's son came into the business and his brother. And those guys, the main guy was James Duke. James Duke was good about selling and about manufacturing, so they had a monopoly on tobacco. The monopoly was sold into America and into Europe, and these guys were selling billions of dollars worth of product a year, making very good money. So George Washington Duke always said that James Duke could not be his son because he was mean, cantankerous, and he was ornery. And he was greedy. So he said, it couldn't be my son. Well, anyway, when Buck Duke took over the company, because his father retired or faded out of the woodwork, he was supporting a college called Trinity College in North Carolina. So one day he went to Trinity College and said, folks, I've been giving you, he met with the board of directors and the CEO and those guys. He said, folks, we've been giving you a lot of money for a lot of years. I want you to change this name of this university from Trinity to Duke. And that's how Duke University came about. So now, come up to about 1890, and at this time, Duke has a monopoly. Well, he owned all the tobacco companies, called vertical integration. So he buy out the competitors, And he would then have no competition, so he had a monopoly on the products, and he sold them very well. So now, when 1890 come up and he formed the American Tobacco Trust, after what Carnegie did, because he thought Carnegie's idea was kind of dramatic, because Carnegie was making lots of money, he figured he could make lots of money with vertical integration. Well, he did. Make a long story short, when he passed away in 1925, his daughter Doris Duke inherited $2.9 billion with a B. And for 1925, there's a lot of money. So then, since he owns all the manufacturing plants, in those days, people would come to my grandfather's farm, George Washington Kinney, and what he did, he was a tobacco buyer. That meant he had barns. He'd buy tobacco from the farmer, and then they would house the tobacco till it came into case or to cure, and then he'd hire the farmers back to process the tobacco for market. And so there'd be many, many buyers would come through, all through Kentucky, Tennessee, the Carolinas, buying tobacco. There were many, many buyers because there was many manufacturing plants. Well, since Buck Duke owned them, he became a monopolist, which meant he was the only buyer. So instead of making 10, 15, 20 cents a pound for tobacco products from the farmer, the price started to dwindle down and down and down and went down to 1 and 2 cents a pound, about 1901, 1902. And then the tobacco farmers said, we've had enough. And so they put together a vigilante group. They were different pockets. They were all called the Night Riders. In northern Kentucky, it was Lexington down to Louisville over to eastern Kentucky. And what they did is they would ride at night. They would go into a tobacco farmer's place that was selling to the trust. They would pull them out, horsewhip them badly, and then they would burn down the tobacco barns. Over in Covington, Kentucky, they did a major warehouse. I'm not sure how many pounds there were, but it was a big event. So then the guys in Ohio or Cincinnati, the Cincinnati Police Department, along with some militia guys, they guarded the river so the night riders wouldn't come across the river to burn down the tobacco barns in Cincinnati. So they defended that. So this thing goes on for a while. It goes on from like 1902 to 1908. So as things progressed and things got more violent, again, there's 10,000 guys riding horses at night. And there was also 650,000 people involved in this fight. And it was in many, many states. And that's what the book's about. It's about the tobacco wars. So then, about 1908, the farmers decided not to raise any tobacco. So they cut it off. They thought they could destroy the crop of tobacco to slow down the supply, to raise the prices. Didn't work. Even with all the violence that went on, and all the barn burnings, and all the warehouse burnings, Buck Duke had plenty of tobacco. And that's why the price was so cheap. So it came to an end with the military coming in. Some of the state militia, those kind of fellows, they thought they would give the night riders a taste of their own medicine. So they started going after the night riders and pretty well started breaking them up. One big story was in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, where you had 100 night riders come into Hopkinsville about 1 o'clock in the morning. What they did is they took, first place they went to was the sheriff's or the police department. They took the chief of police, locked him up. Then they went door to door, knocking on doors saying, we're here to burn down the tobacco barns or the tobacco warehouses. Don't come out of your house. So they didn't, and they burned down probably 500,000, 600,000, 700,000 pounds of tobacco was put ablaze that night. So things started getting the attention of Washington. And at that time you had President Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. He was president. And Teddy was known more as a trust buster because the trust had a lot of things. They had control of the country. I found this book. This is another book. It's called The Truth About the Trust. In the day, there was about 440 trusts. Ice cream trust, ice trust, leather trust, banking trust, steel mill trust. they controlled the market because what they had done is they created vertical integration, buy out the competition, and they're the only source in town. And so they controlled the farmer, they controlled the working man, the labor guys who was getting the short end of the stick. The day the tobacco farmer was squeezed financially. He couldn't pay his bills, he couldn't make any money. But they also had the mining guys, the railroad guys, the steel guys, they were also controlled. So the night riders beat the tobacco farmers. But in the bigger thing of the mines and the railroad guys, the Pinkerton guys were the enemy of the day, as Jesse James always said, and Frank James always said. And so the Pinkerton guys would get a hold of the sheriff's office or sometimes the federal troops. Guys wouldn't work. They'd go in there and shoot them, kill them, hundreds of them. And so the whole uproar was big from the 1880s through till about 1910. Then Teddy Roosevelt comes along and he starts to bust up the trust. And he was better known as a trust buster. So in the day, what he did is got the attention of the night riders, got his attention. And what they did is they went and started beating up on the trust guys. So Buck Duke was the head of the list. And so was Rockefeller with Standard Oil. So they went before the Supreme Court on 1911, and the first guy to get shot down was Buck Duke. He had 6 or 8 tobacco companies formed into a vertical integration, and those 6 or 8 companies, they had to bust them up and put them off. Then Rockefeller came in that afternoon and finished off, the Supreme Court finished off Rockefeller's trust. And then from then on, the trust started going downhill pretty quick. The trouble with the trust, it's a monopoly. Monopoly controls that particular business with vertical integration. So if we fast forward to today, we have the same thing going on today that was going on back then. They're not called a trust, but they're called a monopoly. And you're probably going to hear more and more of this as we go into the election this year and the election 2020. And the vertical integration guys are Google, Amazon, Apple, those guys. Back in the day, the trust normally had 5, 10, 15 companies that they controlled, that particular market. Today, these companies have 150, 100, 150, 200 companies that they control. So they buy out anything that's associated with, say, with Facebook, anything that's associated with vertical integration. Excuse me. That is a temptation to control that particular market. Now, you know, Facebook has very few competitors, and the competitors they do have they're very, very weak. So the vertical integration that Facebook has done is controlling his particular market. Same with Google. Another thing these companies do is they pay them a very low wage. So it's mainly back like the tobacco farmer, low wages going in. They depend on the welfare system for their livelihoods. So they're not only getting low wages from those corporations, but they're also getting welfare checks to support their family, which is a welfare program. So those companies are using welfare to support their employees so they can function with small income. Anytime that you want to talk and bring up a question, raise your hand and just speak. Any questions? Anybody got any questions so far? Yes, ma'am. Well, in our welfare system today, if you make below the poverty line, income-wise, you qualify for food stamps and for rent and those types of things. And so that's being done to keep those people alive, going, because their wages are so low. So that's what's happening. That's how it works. So, any other questions? No? Okay. As things went on, the government stepped in to help the tobacco farms stabilize the pricing. So what they did is around 1938, they put together the tobacco program. The tobacco program meant that when a farmer takes his wares to market, if it doesn't bring the price, the support that it is, the tobacco companies don't buy it, the government would buy it. And then when the price went up, the government would then sell that tobacco back into the marketplace, and they would then take the money. So the tobacco program was self-sufficient. It didn't cost the government or taxpayers any money at all. And when I raised tobacco as a kid with my grandfather, that price support was very, very important. So through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, those price supports were good, but again, it mainly held, it's mainly self-sufficient, and most of the time, the tobacco companies would buy all the tobacco. The tobacco program ended sometime later, and what they did is they decided, since the tobacco, yes, sir.
When the government resells the tobacco they purchased, doesn't that depress the price of the other sellers because there's more tobacco available?
Well, they take it off the market until the price went up. Then they would sell into a higher price market. So it didn't affect anybody. They just had to compete. But they gave us a price support level so that the price of tobacco could be sold, the tobacco could be sold at a support level that the farmer could make money on. So, and back in the days when I was a kid in the early 50s, if you got, what, $1 a pound, that was a lot of money back then. So, little town of Brooksville, Kentucky, in those days, Bracken County had 5 dealerships. Had Ford, had a Ferguson, Chevrolet, Pontiac, Dodge. It was a very prosperous area. So people were, all through the Depression and through the 40s and 50s, people were buying new clothes, new cars. And so it was very prosperous at the time. So people who were part of the liquor business or the tobacco business prospered very well in those days. So you look anxious to talk. No, you.
Just a second, let me give you a microphone.
Here's the question. Let you frame it the way you want to. It appears to me like it's a form of slavery.
Which part?
All of it. The way I'll just go with that. How do you see this in the making of a slave, in the way that the tobacco industry controlled everything? And like you said, they paid these workers such low wages that they qualified for food stamps and government support, so they couldn't even support themselves on the wages. That's a form of slavery.
Yes, it is. It was a form of slavery back in the day too, because in Pennsylvania and West Virginia, back many years ago, you had even foremen or managers that worked in the coal mines. They were paid very low wages. That's why they had the company towns, the company store, the company housing. That was a form of slavery. And what they did is they controlled what they did. So when they got rebellious, they said, this is not fair, we're not gonna do this anymore. That's when they brought in Pinkerton. Pinkerton, they were a bad group of guys. And as you know, Jesse James and his gang was always chased by the Pinkerton guys. I worked with Jesse James's great nephew. His name was Frank James, and Frank James was his grandfather. So he told me stories about Jesse and his gang back in those days. And Pinkerton was really the guys that was the enemy. And they would team up with troops that would go in and kill the miners, kill the railroad workers, and just do a slaughterhouse. And it was a bad thing. So it was slavery, you're right. Very good. Oh, let's see. I got a couple of stories I need to bring to the forefront. So I got to reach back in my head and see where they're at. One time in Brooksville, the night riders came up to George Washington Kinney's house, during the middle of the night, threw branches on the front porch. And when you throw branches on the front porch of a house, that means tomorrow night, we're coming back. We're going to horsewhip you. We're going to burn down our tobacco barns. So Mr. Kinney gets up at first light, gets on his horse, rides to Maysville, which is about 20 miles away. He gets over there and talks to the Army officer, said, I've been threatened by the night riders. I need some support. So they sent a platoon of guys over, and they camped out on the corner of, it's on Highway 10, just outside Brooksville, and they sat there for 1 year to protect the farm. Well, at the end of that year, the sergeant or the captain, whoever it was, he goes to Mr. Kinney and says, Mr. Kinney, there's been no night rider activity here for over a year. And we're going to have to break ground and go back to Maysville. So reluctantly, they left. That night, about midnight at 1 o'clock, they show up. And when they show up, they were masked men with torches. And that particular leader was Grandpa George Washington Jett. So they bring Mr. Kinney out, and they horsewhip him pretty bad. And then they go back and proceed to burn down all our tobacco barns. And that's where it got kind of wild. We had a neighbor, his name was Bob Stanton. Bob Stanton had a farm next to ours. And he lives in town in Brooksville. They came in one night and got him because he was a tobacco buyer. And he had about 50, 60,000 pounds of tobacco in a warehouse just outside Brooksville. So they got him out of his house. They put a rope around his feet, put the other end of the rope around a horse saddle, horn, drug him through the streets of Brooksville. Now back then it was dirt or mud. They get him out to his warehouse, standing him up, and then they lit his warehouse down, burned down all of his tobacco. A lot of burnings, a lot of, the night riders are very dominant, very strong in those days. But things turned pretty quickly. In 1908, 1907 in there, with what they did down in Hopkinsville and what they're doing in northern Kentucky, the militia came along and started giving them a piece of their own medicine. Then there was a fellow in Hopkinsville, Dr. Amos. Dr. Amos is the one that founded the Night Riders because they wanted to stand up against the tyranny that was going on with Buck Duke. So he formed the Night Riders. They went and visited the KKK, which is up in Indianapolis, Indiana, that where it was founded. And they said, we want you to teach us how to be guerrilla fighters. And so the story went that they taught them how to be guerrilla fighters. They said, we don't want any part of you. This is not your fight, it's our fight. So Dr. Amos was the one that created and started the Night Rider movement. It was called the, Night Rider movement. And so when things started to come to an end, you got 10,000 Night Riders who did terrible things, they even killed some people. And then you had the time that this thing was going to be disbanded. And so as things got disbanded, all the guys that was in the society was a secret society. Dr. Amos was pretty well known for his activity. There was no prosecution. No one went after the Night Riders to prosecute them for the criminal deeds they did. And Dr. Amos, he was the key guy, and he went before the Christian County Courthouse back about 1908, 1909, somewhere in there, and went before the judge. And the judge talked to him a little bit about his activities, and he said yes, and turned him loose. So there was no prosecution of the Night Riders in those days. And Dr. Amos ended up going to New York, living out his life in New York City. And that's where he ended up. And so the whole thing was disbanded. Even the names of the Night Riders say in Bracken County. What Stephanie heard is that the list was burned. So there's no knowledge of who they were. I'm sure a lot of people had a good idea who they were. So that's an interesting part of the story. So now the trust is being broken up by Teddy Roosevelt, and you have the money guys. They're losing their power to control vertical integration, and so they're saying, now what do we do now? We got a problem. So in the dark of night, around 1910, in December, a bunch of guys get on a train in New York, the money guys, the Dukes, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, all the money guys. And they head down to Jekyll Island, Georgia. And the idea is they get down there and say, what are we going to do now? And so they sit around and they talk for a while, and they meet down there on a regular basis, and they say, we have to do something to protect our money, or do something. And so what they did is they worked for a couple of 2 or 3 years, and then all of a sudden in 1913, what did they come up with? Come up with the Federal Reserve, and they came up with the IRS. And so those guys then stepped in to take over for what the trusts were doing. And so that's why we're saddled with the Fed and the IRS today, is because that was a protectionism. Now, they started out with a very simple 7% tax on everybody. And there were some senators that objected to that. They said the government should have no right to be able to tax people in this fashion. So there was a kind of an uproar in Congress over it, but they still did it. And they did pass the amendment. It did pass, I think, in later on 1913. So that's how we got those guys. And those guys were able to take the big companies to help align big governments, or the big government we have back then and today. So when they got that going, excuse me, just a minute. That's better. So they got that going. Then you had Teddy Roosevelt and Taft. They were kind of the progressive guys on the right. They believed in giving a guy a hand up, not a hand out. And then Woodrow Wilson shows up. And what does Woodrow Wilson do? He gets hand out, free stuff, get me elected. We can move this forward. And they did. So he became progressive on the left. And so that's what got us started on some of the welfare stuff. And then, you know, after that was World War I came out, which killed a lot of guys, especially from this country. And the tax thing kept going. And so they still controlled the 1%, well, it's not the 1%, it's only 0.1%, who control the vertical integration, who control the monopolies, are still alive and still doing well today. So that's part of that story. Any questions? Yes, sir.
How, you know, the union should have been forming about then.
It's not on.
You don't hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Oh, the union should have been forming about that time. And, you know, there was a lot of violence with them also, because when the miners tried to unionize, you know, they sent in the National Guard and stuff to well, cause accidents and stuff in the mines. So I was just wondering if how this is tied in. Looks like it's all that period's going on where the people are trying to get some control back for their lives because they obviously had lost it.
Well, back in those days when the union started to organize, remember the first guy that did some good for the working guys was Henry Ford. Henry Ford put in the first time he raised the income of the working guys, he raised the wage of $5 a day from probably $1 a day. So he moved the rights of workers up quite a bit. But then the union came in to try to protect the workers from the unions. And I'm sorry. The union came in to protect the workers from the asset owners. The asset owners wanted to have as cheap labor as they could get in the day. And they did have very cheap labor. So they stood up against them, and the Pinkerton guys stood up with the asset owners. And the asset owners would fight back with guns and get some people killed and get them back down to where they would go back to work. So the union guys came in to protect the labor guys. And so that evolved over a period of years. One of the worst unions of the day was not only the railroad trust, but it was also the miners, but they were getting hit pretty bad. So then in the 30s, you had General Motors. General Motors had what's called Buick City. This is back in the 30s. Buick City was low wages and hard work. Reuter was the guy that was the union organizer in those days. And so they had a major strike at Flint, which is where Buick City was. The strike was bloody. It was pretty bad, but got a lot of people hurt. With that, you had General Motors was not very appreciative of the people of Buick City going on strike. And so you know Michael Moore came out with a movie, On a Clear Day You Can See General Motors. And General Motors eventually killed Flint and Buick City. And so that changed that put Flint into kind of poverty over the same thing. So these fights have been going on for a long time. It's nothing new to see what we do. But still, we got the greatest country in the world. It's right here. So now we got, they say, why is Trump on your book? Well, Trump was very much like Teddy Roosevelt. In the day, you had the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, and the Obama administration. During their time frame, they were able to take 60,000 manufacturing plants out of this country. And so what you had there is you had the middle class was dropping in prosperity. Their incomes were going down. They were losing jobs. And this goes on, I think, from the 70s through 2010. My job is I'm an industrial sales guy. We call in steel mills, coal mines, paper mills, foundries, and that type of thing. So in the day, they would come along, and a company was going to go out of business. They would auction off, say, take a paper mill. They would auction off everything in that paper mill. Then they would crate that equipment up that was in the paper mill and export it to China or to Southeast Asia. And so you had 60,000 companies that crippled the middle class of the day. So now what you got with Trump's bringing those jobs back, because what was done with about 4 administrations to remove jobs from the country, Trump has done a great job in bringing companies back, bringing manufacturing out of Mexico. If you notice, Apple is bringing over, is going to invest $350 billion in America over the next several years to bring back manufacturing into the United States. And so since he's changed the tax code, and now we can enjoy better prosperity because our taxes went down, corporations are doing the same thing. They're coming back to this country. They're building new factories, new plants, and employing people. Trouble is now you have more job openings than you have employees or available labor. There's a guy up in between Flint and Lansing, Michigan. It's called the Tim Project. Now, nobody knows who Tim is, but he's buying 1,000 acres on the interstate, Interstate 65. And it's right along the interstate. And his plans are to build the most modern manufacturing facility in the world. And it's going to be built under 24 million square feet of roof. And so this is supposed to be the most modern update the facility there is. They located there then because of the automobile industry was there, and they can take that talent and put it to work in these new modern factories, which are going to be robotics. It's going to be cool stuff, computers, robotics. Now what they need is they need skilled trades people to come in and man those kind of jobs. How many jobs they're going to produce, I don't know, but I know it's a big operation and it's still secret. But manufacturing is coming back because Trump is the one that's bringing it back, because the 60,000 plants that left here put unemployment high because they could not get jobs. They weren't there. So now he's bringing that back. He brought us back the tax code, dropped that down. So he's making some great changes. He got rid of a lot of regulations that was unnecessary. And so he's done a fabulous job. When I go in these plants today, everybody's happy. Some of these automotive guys, they get bonuses of $5,000 to $10,000 that they take home to their families. So that money is being well spent, well done. And you can lay this on Trump, because I think he's going to be the best president we have. We're going to have 4 of them. George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Reagan, and Trump are going to be 4 of our best presidents. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was also reading about a week and a half ago in the investment, Samsung's going to bring 1,400 jobs to Texas because of the trade tariffs.
Nick, right? Yeah. Amazon, they're doing phenomenal things. Except Amazon's is really into that. They created that vertical integration where they control too much. Now, another thing that's been talked about. This is an article, Stephanie, by the way, that's my daughter back there, Stephanie Rumford. And she tries to keep me on the straight and narrow. But this is a story about about monopolies. Now, they don't call monopolies trust anymore because the trusts are all gone and they're outlawed. But the companies that operate, which is Google, Uber, Facebook, and one other one, Amazon. These guys all do vertical integration. It's illegal to do that. They're operating illegally. It's against the law. It goes against the Antitrust Act of 1890. And they say, well, that's old history. That's old antiquated politics. Well, it still pertains today, because what was said back when the monopolies were the trusts were being busted up, if you have a trust, the tobacco trust, you own all the companies in that trust, you kill entrepreneurship and you kill capitalism. That goes by the wayside. And so it basically detonates entrepreneurship. This country is founded on free capitalism, capitalist country, and that's what we are. The 0.1 or 0.5% of the rich, they want all the pies. So what they said back in the day says, well, Trump, or not Trump, Duke, he didn't want part of the pie, he wanted all of the pie. And he did too, and he got it until it was broken up. So now there's word that I hear that these monopolies of today are looking at how do we break these companies up and make them competitive. So when you have a company like whoever they are with 50, 100, 200 companies under their wing, they're stifling capitalism and entrepreneurship, and they need to be broken up, and it's a lot of people working in that direction. So what happened? The book goes, yes.
We've got an online question.
Yes.
We have a question from an online viewer. Why do you think the last 4 administrations agreed to uneven trade deals and did nothing about taxes?
Well, I wouldn't say that. What I would say is under the past 4 administrations, that event took place. What part did they play in it? I have no idea. But during those years, as the companies left, that was under those administrations. Now, what part they played, again, I don't know. But that was it. Good question. I'd like to know the answers to that.
Just this afternoon, I saw on the internet that Jim Jordan is proposing that the tech giants be brought under the same rules as the publishing companies. I don't know whether you saw that or not. I'm a little confused about it. I'd like to know more about it. But and I'm with you on Amazon is too strong. I consider Amazon, what they're doing, illegal, and I don't know why the government, including Trump, I know he's grousing about this, but about Amazon, but I wish he would do something about it. Evidently, what you're saying, he might be doing it.
I think he'll do something about it after the election. That's why we got to get the Republicans back in. I don't mean to make this a political speech, but I'm pretty much a right guy. Let's take Google or Facebook. Let's take them as an example. They were here before. They were here back in the 1800s. guess who controlled the news media of the 1800s? You remember the last ride you had was the Pony Express. The Pony Express lasted 18 months. And so the demise of the Pony Express was the telegraph, because the telegraph then, it was spread throughout the country. And so you had, for the day, not like today, but back then, you had instant communication. And what did they do? They did what Facebook does and what Google does. They were left-leaning or right-leaning, one way or the other. They wanted to take their attitude and their thought process and try to change the minds of the American people. And so that's what happened back in those days. Now, today, we got the same thing going on, except it's going on with Google and Facebook and several others. But that was the lean times of the day. And then you had the Randolph Hearst, you had New York Times. I think they were there then. I'm sure they were. They were publishing articles that were leaning towards their political beliefs, whichever side they were on. Nice. I did not know that. Thank you very much for that question. Any other thoughts? Has this been helpful? Okay. But anyway, the telegraph was a new way of transforming information. Now, when I was a kid growing up in Bracken County, my great-grandfather bought that house in 1869, and what it was, the French came into the old Virginia territory back in the 1700s, 1750 to 1790. And what they did is they tried to civilize the country a bit. And so they would build log cabin courthouses in every county. They would put the log cabin courthouse in the middle of the county in Kentucky and Tennessee, and probably over in the Virginia area. And of course, West Virginia was part of Virginia. And they would build them out this log house. So in Bracken County, they built the log courthouse in the center of the county. Just outside Brooksville. It was called Oxford. So they were out there. There was nothing there. They were out there with all the trees and the antelope and the deer and the buffalo. And so the judge and the attorneys at the time, they got tired of that. The action was down in Augusta, Kentucky on the river. Now, Augusta, Kentucky was much more prosperous than Cincinnati was at the time, because Cincinnati was just a little town, very little town. So all the action was up in Augusta. So one day, the judge and the attorney said, we're packing up and we're going to move to Augusta. So they moved the courthouse down to Augusta, and they abandoned that courthouse sometime in the early 1800s. So in 1869, my great-grandfather came along, bought that courthouse in 60 or 80 acres and moved and started a family. His wife's name was Eliza Jane Hancock Kinney, and she was a fiery young lady. He was very fine young man, and they did good in Brooksville. They came out of Shiloh, Ohio over here and settled in Brooksville as a young married couple. And so they took that log courthouse and turned it into a home. We lived in that log courthouse until they tore it down in 1957, 1958 and built a modern house. So I was raised in a log cabin in Kentucky. Our log cabin was a little bit better than Abraham Lincoln's log cabin, but it was a log cabin. And so had lots of cousins, brother and sister, so we had a great time there. So it was a great way to grow up. So my grandfather was high sheriff of Bracken County in the 40s, 48 to 52. And so we come from a political family. But tobacco's always been a big part of our background. And then the stories of tobacco, which was handed down from time to time over the years. If you work a patch of tobacco, you'll know this. If you're out in a patch of tobacco, we'd be suckering it or hoeing it or worming it or whatever, very, very quiet. So if I'm talking like this without a microphone, 4, 5, 6 rows over on either side, you could hear each other talk. And what did they talk about? They talked about the night riders. Oops. They talked about the tobacco wars. They talked about things of that type. When I was a kid, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, it was really a great experience to hear the old folks talk about what happened in the day. Another thing they did, and you'll probably remember this, they used to have contests. When they started cutting tobacco, what they would use is a tomahawk. They cut the stalk of tobacco and they put it on a spear onto a tobacco stick. And the tobacco sticks, you put 6 stalks of tobacco on a tobacco stick. So the idea was who could go from the beginning of the row to the end of the row. And they would be the winners, and there was a prize for doing that. But those guys got 5 cents a stalk for cutting tobacco back in the 40s. So 5 cents a stalk, 100 stalks, $50. So, but everybody had a good time doing it. But the money was not in cutting tobacco. The money was when you sold the tobacco. And so a lot of people made some good money on tobacco in those days. So let's hope that we can keep this economy going, that we've got it, and that people can take a look at the cesspool in Washington and clean that out. And I think we will. I think we've got a great future. I think our best years of this country are ahead of us, not behind us. So, and there's a lot of great companies out there doing a lot of high technology. So, and the space travel's coming up. Things that, you know, back in the day, you had a buckboard, a stagecoach, horse ride. Just imagine the people that went from New York or Washington to Oregon with a wagon and with horses. The people in this country, they literally come from a great stock of folks. So this country is fabulous in all aspects of it. So I'm proud to be here, and I'm glad you guys had the patience to listen to me. Hope it wasn't too boring. Hope it was informative. So anyway, that's what the book's about.
Anybody have any other questions for Jim tonight? Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you for coming.